Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thanks very much to colleagues at Skills Development Scotland and the Centre for Work-Based Learning for inviting me to participate in today's programme. It's a really fantastic view of Glasgow out there. It's a shame it can't just stop raining for a wee bit. I was really engaged by the topic, the future, though my crystal ball these days seems more like an out-of-kilter kaleidoscope most of the time, and it is very hard to predict, and I wouldn't want to be in the predictions business. The future of work is global, say my slides, and my day job is very much about the global, but always trying to make it connect to the local and make sure that there is a mutual benefit in that connection. As Willie said, the British Council is the UK's organisation for international cultural relations and educational opportunities. It could be a bit snappier. We exist to create and develop positive relationships and trust between people here in Scotland and the UK and countries all around the world. We were actually founded in the 1930s as a response and a counterweight to rising extremism in Europe. And we have an established and embedded presence in 115 countries around the world. We work primarily in the fields of culture, education, society, science, English language, and qualifications, areas where both Scotland and the wider UK can be said to have actually unparalleled assets, which enhance our attractiveness and influence internationally and enable us to contribute positively. And I would like to take this platform, if I may, to make a wholehearted, unambiguous, positive and enthusiastic case for internationalism, why it's not only good, but also essential for our future prosperity and success as a nation, our ability to be an attractive partner that people want to connect with and learn from and do business with. Our work in my organisation is built on the premise that not only do constructive international relations contribute to stability, prosperity and security globally, they can and should also directly benefit people, organisations and communities at home. We would like to see a wider appreciation and understanding of this and an extension of opportunities to many more people, particularly young people, to participate as global citizens. Internationalism has taken a bit of a bashing in some quarters over the past couple of years, equated sometimes with elitism, with globalization, and other trends which are sometimes perceived to have left groups of people behind. For some organizations, including my own, this has prompted some occasionally very uncomfortable soul-searching and self-examination. Have we done enough? Not just to make the positive case about the value and benefits of international connection, but also to ensure that those opportunities and benefits are as widely extended and as accessible and as relevant as they could be to people in all our communities. And we have resolved to do more. Internationalism is more important than ever and important for all of us. And here's why. The world is changing in all kinds of ways. The pace of change is Peter said, and as I go on to illustrate, is both faster and continuing to accelerate rapidly. And the reach and therefore the impact of those changes is vastly more extensive than at any time in the history of human development. With technology-enabled change, the world is ever more interdependent and interconnected. And perhaps this does erode people's sense of control and ability to influence their own circumstances, and maybe it prompts a pulling back. I'm not intending to ascribe motive or make generalizations about why people might vote the way they do, but that ability to have agency in your own life is a fundamental human characteristic. But nonetheless, against the backdrop of this increasing interconnectedness, the UK is in the process of withdrawing from one framework for international cooperation and setting about repositioning itself globally. In the meantime, while we do that, there are huge practical and profound implications. We're already facing skills gaps in key sectors. For example, the creative industries, which is among the fastest growing sector of the economy here in the UK, is already facing severe skills gaps. And according to the Creative Industries Federation's recent Global Talent Report, finds it difficult to attract and retain the international talent required to succeed. 6.7% of the workers in the creative industries are non-UK EU nationals, but this exposure is deeper in certain disciplines. For example, 30% of our visual effects specialists in the screen sector, which is a growing sector, and also 25% of architects are non-UK EU nationals. Restrictions on freedom of movement will have deep practical implications for this and for many other sectors. It could take quite some time, if we are ever able to grow our own talent, to replace people who may no longer wish or may no longer be able to come here. However, the skills lens alone underplays the potential change afoot. Many of our most successful and innovative sectors are fundamentally global and international sectors, with diversity and internationalism important contributing factors in their success. We really need a better appreciation of this. And of course, the economy is only one lens. So, as we know, we are connected like never before, and we sometimes forget how far we have come in what, in historical terms, as Peter said, is a very short period of time. And at the heart of this, of course, lies the internet. From the last decade of the 20th century to now, we've moved from a tiny proportion of early adapters of around 3 million to getting on for half of the world's population using the internet, and using it in ways that we, who've gone through a kind of progressive stage of development, can't really understand or get our heads around. The numbers of websites have seen similarly exponential increase. In 1994, there were 3,000 websites. The number of websites passed the 1 billion mark in September 2014, along with other things in September 2014. Today, more than 3,000 websites are created every 6 minutes. So we have unimaginable volumes of information and knowledge, potentially. And a key outcome of that is to make the world we live in sometimes seem less mysterious, less other, more immediate and more accessible. And of course, getting on for half of the world's population now has the ability to connect with each other in many different ways through the web. You'll be aware of the scale of these platforms. About 25% of the world's population is using Facebook at least once a month. There are literally billions of videos from YouTube, my daughter as well as yours using them for maths every day. Globally, we send 2.5 million emails every second. I sometimes feel that most of those are going to my inbox. These statistics are mind-boggling. But yet what is striking too is just how quickly all this has happened. Facebook, YouTube, etc. have been with us for little more than a decade. Email just 10 years before that. Yet these ways of connecting, sharing, communicating on the web are now in some cases established, but in other places already surpassed. Spending quite a bit of time in Africa, nobody uses email anymore, it's all WhatsApp. In China, it's WeChat. And as I mentioned, both the rate and the reach of change is key here. All of this is multiplied by the multiplication of mobile phone ownership and what people can do with a mobile phone in their hands. And we're mobile physically as well as virtually, like never before. There are more migrants, more people living in other countries than the one they are from than at any time in human history. Around 230 million people, over 3% of the world's population, were migrants in 2013. There's been a 33, there we go, sorry, catching up. There's been a 33% increase in migrants in less than a generation. And that's not just because the world's population is increasing. The proportion of migrants has jumped 10% in that time. We now have large cities and megacities where very significant proportions of the population are migrants. Around 33% in London, 4 out of 5 in Dubai. And these megacities are leading the way in exponential urbanization, but they're also indicative of a broader change. Increasing virtual connectedness isn't the only cause of this rapid increase in mobility. It's fueled too by economics and by radically different demographic trends in different countries and regions. In the UK in 2007, the number of people over the state pension age overtook the number of people under 16 for the first time. Some countries struggle to find indigenous young people to fill their jobs, while other countries struggle with very high levels of unemployment, particularly amongst the young. Migration is the natural consequence and will probably continue to be until automation becomes more affordable or more financially viable than human labour, or until artificial or super artificial intelligence provides alternative models. In Europe, migration has also been fueled by the rapid expansion of the EU in the last generation and the ability of more and more Europeans to take advantage of the freedom of movement of people within the EU. The increase of mobility has also been stimulated by, and in turn has helped to stimulate that revolution in air travel that feels so commonplace now. Again, this is, in historical terms, a very recent development. Those low-budget airlines that we love to hate were the trailblazers. They've only been around since the mid-90s. They've helped transform air travel from something, it says here glamorous and elite, but I'm not sure it was ever that, to something very different, and to an extent to democratize it. We can now fly to vastly more places, more often, and far more cheaply than a generation ago, and young people have really seized that opportunity. So what does this mean for businesses and employers? It means that what we call being interculturally fluent or comfortable and competent across cultures is now a core employability skill. Over 90% of large employers in the UK rate it as important. Intercultural fluency can help to ensure that having different cultures in a team is an asset and not a disadvantage. It can also be critical for monocultural teams where customers or suppliers or target markets are from different cultures. And of course, it can help organisations to operate more successfully across cultures, including in the areas of business. For businesses, intercultural fluency is increasingly not a nice to have, reinforcing some of the points that Peter made. It impacts directly on reputation and the bottom line. A recent analysis of Chinese organisations that I saw concluded that cultural differences in management style was one of the top 3 barriers to Chinese companies doing business with Europe. And intercultural fluency can impact not just on how successful and effective individuals or organisations are, it can also do the same for societies. So, how do we stack up in the face of these challenges? How interculturally fluent are our current and future workforces? And are we taking the right steps to ensure that we can compete and collaborate in the future? Are we equipping our future workforce with the skills they're going to need to thrive? I should issue a statistics warning at this point. We are very keen on research at the British Council, and here are a few of them. As these statistics suggest, we are currently still utilising essentially 20th century educational approaches to prepare people for a very different 21st century world. The figure, incidentally, of employers who thought that the education system did nothing at all to prepare people in this area was 41%. In 2013, the Association of Graduate Employers reported that 79% of employers cited knowledge of the wider world is more important than classification of degree. And more recently, the QS Global Employer Survey report found that 6 out of 10 employers around the world would actually give extra credit for an international student experience, and more than 80% said that they actively sought graduates who had overseas experience. It's not clear to me that we are doing enough here in the UK to properly prepare students for a global workforce in any sector. According to some of our own recent research, 74% of CEOs in the UK believe that we are in danger of being left behind by emerging economies unless our young people can learn to think globally. And let's remember that as a country, we are actually seeking an increasing number of trade agreements with global markets and to extend our business networks. To adjust to this, large, small, and medium-sized businesses will increasingly need international competencies and knowledge. A word, if I may, on languages. Leaving the European Union will not only change our relationship with the EU, but also with the rest of the world. Brexit has given us an urgency in our quest to be an international trading power beyond Europe, while at the same time highlighting our interconnectedness with our European neighbours. Among the skills and capabilities that we'll need is understanding of other cultures and languages. essential for relationships at all levels. Both within and out with Europe, we'll need to reach out beyond English and not just assume that everybody can understand it, because that's only part of the story. Not only to maintain and improve our economic position, but to build trust, to deepen international influence and cultural relationships, and to keep our country safe. In terms of which languages we'll need most, we're currently finalising a significant piece of research on languages for the future, updating a comprehensive study we undertook in 2013. We would anticipate that Spanish, French, Mandarin, Arabic, and German will remain the top languages required. Despite quite a positive policy framework for languages here in Scotland, the 2+1 framework, our language capability does remain a concern. In spite of those positive policy developments, entry numbers for language examinations are still dropping year on year in French and German in particular, with Spanish being the exception and being slightly more buoyant. Language provision in some schools and universities looks vulnerable, and opportunities to learn languages in vocational pathways in particular are very scarce. And some of the languages we are likely to need most in the future have only a very marginal place in our education systems. A particular bugbear and concern of mine is that we cannot do more to seem to combine languages and STEM and technical subjects and capabilities, because surely that will make our young people more attractive and competitive employees in the future. Countries like Ireland and Australia are doing far, far better on this score than we are. We also regularly conduct research into attitudes to the UK, and in a survey of young people internationally, these are 18 to 35-year-olds, 3 of the top 5 worst characteristics attributed to people in the UK are directly related to a lack of intercultural fluency. There were, of course, very many positive perceived attributes too, but I am just focusing on the case for change. You can see what they are, and the UK will hardly be alone in this. So, the ever-increasing levels of mobility for many around the world are only set to continue rising, and we know that there is latent appetite among our young people. For increasing numbers of young people, studying and living and working abroad has been relatively straightforward. It's been an obvious and achievable option compared with a generation ago. We want to make sure that such opportunities are conceivable and within reach of all our young people, whatever their background. Our own experience from the mobility programs that we run, such as Erasmus Plus and IASTI, demonstrate that these opportunities can be truly life-changing for the young people themselves, but also create multiplied benefits for their colleges, their universities, and their workplaces. And I do have some case studies if anyone is interested later. So, interconnectedness and mobility are defining characteristics of our world in the early 21st century, a world in these senses very different from that of the late 20th century. And this far more globalized world requires significantly different skills from a generation ago. Language learning is part of this, and so too, increasingly, is intercultural fluency. In today's interconnected world, being able to operate effectively in complex and changing multicultural contexts is a definitive skill. It's about communicating and operating effectively across cultures. It's being able to make the most of diversity. We know that exposure to international experience can strongly contribute to some of those softer skills that Peter talked about earlier. We've seen its contribution in flexibility, adaptability, resilience, resourcefulness, self-management. Taking it up a level, I will just give you a moment to read that. It's the bigger case for internationalism. So for all kinds of reasons, intercultural fluency now has unprecedented importance in the highly globalized world we find ourselves in. But while the world has changed dramatically in less than a generation, what has not changed nearly so quickly and nearly quickly enough are the education systems preparing people for that world. We are focusing very much on the future today in this event. We're anticipating, we're conjecturing, we're drawing on trends, we're making conclusions and developments to forecast what might be ahead. It's an imprecise science, if anything. It brings to mind a long-favoured old quote that I have used before, but it seemed quite apposite again for today. Abraham Lincoln, a previous president of the United States, advised that the best way to predict your future is to create it. And I hope that in doing that, we can make it human, that we ensure that it's global, we ensure that it's inclusive and more equal, and that we equip and enable our young people to really flourish in it. Thank you.